Boa tarde.
Good
Estamos agora
afternoon.
continuidade ao nosso
Now
projeto
we
Simpósio
are
Internacional de
giving
Comunicação Social
connect. We are
Haptic,
continuing our
Assistive
social
e Inclusão.
haptics
Teremos agora
communication technology and inclusion international symposium. But our event does not end today. From 8 to 12, we have the oral presentations. And in the afternoon, we have workshops that you can choose to be part of. 10 to 12, translation and interpretation studies to guide interpretation training. And in the afternoon, from 2 to 4, we have edu communication, facilitating inclusion, and haptisis and haptems, the history, the linguistic view perspective from social haptics communication. You can be part of our YouTube channel. We have a lot of content for you. You can also like our Instagram page. Our name is Gepicsh, so you can see our agenda for the whole year. This is our last one for 2023, but we are going to have much more in the future. I'm going to describe myself. I'm Thais Bigatti. I'm a white woman. I have a curly hair in half of my back, in the middle of my back. My hair is brown, and I have yellow hair too. Now I have João Navega interpreting for me. He's a black man with black power hair, and he's using a black shirt with long sleeves, and the wall behind him is a blue wall. So we invite Professor Warley dos Santos to coordinate the activities. Good afternoon, Thais. Thank you for being our host. Welcome everyone for our next activity, to our first symposium for social haptics communication. I'm Professor Master Warley dos Santos. I am a substitute professor at the Federal University of Santa Catarina. I'm a black man. I have a black power short hair. I'm using a white t-shirt, and and you can see a chair behind me. There's a beige, a cream wall behind me, and a bookshelf on my right side. So welcome again for our guide interpreters perspectives and challenges training lecture, and we have four invitees, for people that are going to be part of this discussion. I'm going to invite them so they can describe themselves. The first one is the guide interpreter specialist, Alexandro Lins. He's a translator interpreter of Libras and Portuguese, and he's president of interpreters and guide interpreters from the Rio de Janeiro state, called AGT-RJ. Good afternoon, Alex. Good afternoon, Marley. Good afternoon, everyone. Can I start my audio description? Yes. So I'm Alex Sandro Lins. I have a bright skin. I have short and curly hair, and they are shaved on the sides. I have a beard, a mustache, an eyebrow that are thick. I'm using a blue shirt. I have a tattoo of a violin and the colors of the rainbow, and I have a white necklace, and I have a white wall behind me. I also invite Professor Elaine Vilela, that is a professor of the Methodist University. Good afternoon, Professor Elaine. Good afternoon, Professor Wiley. Thank you for inviting me. my audio description. I'm a white woman. I have curly dark hair up to my shoulders. I'm using a I'm using blue glasses. I have a red lipstick and I'm using a headset and I'm sitting in front of a white wall. Perfect. Thank you, Eleni. We also have Pedro Witz, that is a professor of University, Federal University of Espírito Santo, and he is a researcher at the interdisciplinary studies group. And we're asking Professor Pedro to open his microphone. Good afternoon. Thank you for your presentation. I'm a white man. I have a mustache and a beard and curly, all brown hair. I use a rounded glasses. I'm using a dark blue t-shirt and a dark blue headphones. I have a small bookshelf behind me and I have a world map as well. Perfect. Welcome, Professor Pedro. And to complete, to have our table, we have Shirley Maya. She's the founder of AHINSA, the Institution for Multiple Disabilities. Good afternoon, Marley. Thank you for your invite. I will describe myself too. I have a bright skin. I have a black straight hair up to my shoulders, and I like to comb to the side. I'm using glasses. Today's code here. The climate change is crazy, so I'm using a green blouse and my jacket, a white jacket, and I'm using a scarf that I always use. It became my sign. Welcome, Professor Shaley, and welcome you all, the participants of our table. All of you have some time to talk about the training of guide interpreters in Brazil, their education. And in the end, we are going to dialogue, so you can ask your questions in Portuguese, in English, or even send us your video with the sign language, with Brazilian Sign Language question that our team is telling you all that you can contact us.
Perfeito. O meu slide está
Okay,
aparecendo.
so is my deck showing to you my slides? So the title of my speech is Formation with Guide Interpreters in Brazil, Consolidating Reflections into Protagonism of GIs. That's the back is the standard of the event with the logo. And also the logo of the Academia Trados and the Methodist University. It might take a little bit because all my slides have the audio description, so I might take a little time to explain that. My name sign is like I'm showing right now, with my hand closed and then opening all the fingers. My presentation now shows we still so far we still have some differences between the practice and the formation, but we still want to in the future have a proper formation for guide interpreters. There is 4 things that I'm going to mention here in my presentation that I think it's important, and will have interfaces with what I'm going to say. Currently, I'm the director of the Association of Guide Interpreters of the Rio de Janeiro State. I'm secretary of FEBRAPILS, the Federation for Interpreters, and also the International uh, International Association of Guide Interpreters too. When I was invited to create a reflection about that, I started to think about what's the place I'm started to say right now. I'm an interpreter Nutella. It's like I just arrived now for this process. I started my formation in 2020, so I'm very new in this, in extension in the university, and I had interest in guide interpreting and also interesting about the gaps in my formation, the act of doing with instead of doing to someone, the intense process of formation during the COVID-19 pandemic. My main formation happened during the pandemic, so it was very intense because everything I didn't know I had to learn in a very short time. And also the thing about thinking in an a teacher investigator, a kind of subject that's never ready. Uh, Let me ask you something. You can answer in YouTube. Who that is watching right now? Who of you are translator and Libris interpreter? Who is guide interpreter? And who is one of those but had all this knowledge about guide interpreting in the starting formation, the basic formation? That's the first reflection. My individual answer is that we didn't have anything about guide interpreting in the formation, but we later on will have this this discussion. Uh, Today we talk about a lot about recognizing the profession. We had a law in 2010 and a new law this year that we say about regulations of the profession of Libras interpreter and guide interpreter. But this discussion already happened several times before, not actually in laws, but we as sign language interpreter, we are also, or we should be habilitated to do also to work with the guide interpretation. The law 14704 that was published this year, it doesn't alter the profession, the career, the profession, but the law that goes to regulation. So the actual law that's still working is the 2010 law here in Brazil. And with this change in the law, now the guide interpreter is there. I highlighted that in yellow. The first thing that we have to think about this, and we can discuss later, is that the translator, interpreter, and guide interpreter of Brazilian Sign Language, we are restricting that this professional is using Brazilian Sign Language, but we know that today is not a reality. Although some studies and some colleagues say that the formation in sign language in Libras and the formation of the guide interpreter, we know that several guide interpreters that work today, they use they use other languages and not exactly Libras. There's other kinds of communication that are not signed. But when we go to this second part, the second item is a professional that means at least one of the ways of communication used by deaf-blind people. So we have a little contradiction because if it is a guide interpreter in Brazilian Sign Language, it means that everyone that knows Brazilian Sign Language can be a guide interpreter, and that's not right. We lost one point that's very important. It's about the formation of translation interpretation, but we lost the formation specific for guide interpretation. The original text from 2017 sad things about the guide interpreter, but during this, we had some losses, and one of those is the specification of the guide interpreter that they had to do a general formation in translation and interpretation of Libras, and then other kind of specialization to be a guide interpreter. The law says in the first article is the professional that translate an interpreter from one sign language. Oh, I'm sorry, it's from one sign language to other or other oral languages. So it means that the translator interpreter is the one that makes the process of translation and interpretation. But when we say about guide interpreter is the one that domains at least one of the ways of communication used by deafblind people. That's the actual text of our legislation. And we have a lot of another thing, another issue that we have to reflect about the difference between guide interpreter and the interpreter for us that we know about the area and can understand that maybe for this time we says as synonymous, but it says that the time the work time is 6 daily hours or 30 hours weekly. But after it says that if it takes more than 1 hour, it has to happen in we need two interpreters and they switch eventually. But the guide interpretation, we know that it's not it's not the same thing if we're talking about guide interpretation. There were some institution that said that translator interpreter is something, but the guide interpreter is other thing. And this text is saying only about the translation and interpretation. It might be trouble, but it's necessary for the public policies. Before that, we already had one normative instruction of SECOM, which is the communication secretary, and says that the guide interpreter is a professional that domains different kinds of communications used with people with deafblind using interpretation or transliteration. That happened before the legislation that changed the profession. We already had other institutions and the policy we're saying it about this professional guide interpreter, and it says that it domains several types of communication, not just only Libras or something. It shows that it's a professional with a high amplitude and a lot of options. When we say about the guide interpretation as an additional formation, we have a need to get what our colleague Eleni will say, that the need to have the formation in the initial formation in the courses of Letras Libras. When we have an analysis of Letras Libras courses in Brazil, I'm showing a table right now in two slides. We always, all those courses always say that they are going to graduate translators, interpreters, not guide interpreters. So this have a specific gap when we think about the graduation. Most of the students, taking off some specific cases, Elaine is going to say later, we don't have specific guide interpreters formation during the formative process, which takes about 4 years here in Brazil. There's other courses. And when we think about the educational policies here in Brazil, recently we had in 2021 the alteration of the Brazilian uh, directives and basics of the education. We have the bilingual education. We think about bilingual education, but we are not talking about special education. We talk about bilingual education. And this proposal supports deafblind too. Deafblind also participate in this kind of in this modality. but deafblind people don't have access of a bilingual education specific for them. They have the access to a bilingual education for deaf people, where deafblind people can also participate in this policy. So that is a little bit off from the policies that we want to say about deafblind as a unique condition. It's a perspective that we still have to think about other kinds of education and not only like a Libra-centric education. We have to think that deafblind people can have other kinds of communications, and that must be translated in our laws too. When we think again about the specialized services offered for deaf deaf public, when we think about the education for kids, the kindergarten, for instance, we have this text that shows the bilingual education for deaf people and also deaf-blind people indiscriminately. But what doesn't the thing that is a good thing is that since we already have other law, which the Brazilian law for inclusion, we have some rights assured, and that doesn't get in the way. In Article 60, it says that the teaching systems will make sure that deaf students, deaf blind people with auditive deficiency, disabilities, deaf with gifted, and there's one only paragraph that still hasn't been regulated says that the contract and the evaluation of teachers will be by the community of people of deaf people. But where are the deaf blind people that will going to evaluate the teachers about that? So we see that we do have a mention to deafblind people in the laws, but they don't. But deaf people will will make the decisions for them without specifically deafblind people doing taking the reins of it. We have another regulation. It's the National Commission of the Bilingual Education for the Deaf. They are creating a national policy of bilingual education of the deaf. FEBRAPIUS that I represent is a part of this commission, and other institutions like Grupo Brasil are a part of this. And we also say about that a lot about deaf, but not with deaf blind people. When we talk about these advancements, we talk about the articulation of these public policies. Unfortunately, in Brazil, we have to have a law to regulate the law and then make another law to make the law work. So we have a lot of things that had to happen. We have the regulation of the guide interpreting profession, but those professionals that work especially in the public service as a guide interpreter, today they still can't work the 6 daily in the federal law because they say that the CPAC, that is the system for the people that work in the federal sphere, they say that we have to make changes in the system. So those professionals still work 8 hours a day and not 6 hours a day. It's still not effective. It's still 40 hours, and we have to open a process for that. And also the switch in 15 or 20 minutes not it's still not working because there's still a discussion that guide interpreting is not interpretation. When we open this dichotomy between translation interpretation and guide interpretation, we are still not, we still don't understand the rights and all the duties of the guide interpreter. So about the switching and things, all these things about switching, it's something that still we're still talking about that. We are like happy that we got this law, but still can't, still not able to use that because it's too new. Other thing is that okay, this profession is now the law is saying that we are a profession, but it's still not in the role of all the professions that exist in Brazil. CBO is the name of that. So there's still a lot of things we have to do. It's not we have this law that's good, but there's still a lot of things we have to do. One thing that I want to say to finish this is the Viver Sem Limites is a policy that was very important to implement the Letras Libras graduation courses, major courses. And now we are having a Viver Sem Limites 2 that happened yesterday. It was promulgated by the president here, and we have a lot of things to we have a lot of things that's going to happen. The first axis, we have social participation. This is about the creation of 27 observatories in each state of Brazil and in the federal district to fiscalize implementation of this policy.
O que são dados muito escassos ainda, principalmente
And we also have to dedicate more time to research, to our research in Brazil, because the needs that we have are much bigger than the theoretical material that we have produced, and also our our training is very important. We are talking about 8,250 professors, teachers working in the inclusive education in regular schools, but we also have 6,000 professionals, and we don't know if their training, if their education also educates them to work with guide interpreters, to work as guide interpreters, and also the teachers to work with deaf and blind people. We also have at the public the police, for example, the public security. So we have to help them to help people to interact with deaf and blind and deaf people. And about technology, we have the implementation of a unit for interpretation of Libras interpretation, but it doesn't talk about guide interpretation. We also have at UFRJ a training for 500 specialists in cultural accessibility, but we don't have the specialty for deaf and blind. And we also have the National Conference of Culture, is the cultural ministry. We are going to have 3 meetings, and it's open for people to sign up. And we ask people to sign up and to talk about the cultural policies to reach more people, especially deaf and blind people, and guide interpreters as professionals. As also and the Ministry of Culture, we have the instruction. I'd like also to talk about the ways of communication. but unfortunately I don't have much time, so I'll leave that for the end. And also another barrier, we don't have in language and literature, in Libras or other courses, the training of guide interpreters. In the legislation, we need to be specified, and in the legislation talk about language and literature in Libras. So we don't have the description of the curriculum. So we have to understand that Libras course graduation has to train and to educate guide interpreters according to the law and to the legislation. So we need to restructure the their curriculum. Many courses here, I work at UFRJ, Federal University of Rio de Janeiro. We don't discuss this, especially because the professors don't have this knowledge. So we need to amplify their knowledge, not to bring more teachers, more professors. So we have to improve and to deepen our own formation, our own training, of our own education. We have just little courses for guide interpreters and in guide interpretation courses, continued courses. So the perspectives and the next steps, we have talked to Gepicsh, is from the Education Ministry department that talk about bilingual education. So we want to offer the courses for guide interpreters, public and free for everybody. So we started this conversation with the Federation of Interpreters too, and public universities. So we are discussing this initial training, and also the society who has been doing this work along the years. Next year, in 2024, we are going to have ENAGE, the National Guide Interpreters Meeting. Araceli and I have argued that Traduz Academy is going to be our partner. So we have the icon. We have ENAG in capital letters, and the letter A is the small one, and the letter I has the drawing of a doll of a person using a cane to walk, and it's going to be in 2024, the third edition. In this picture, we have Nara Oliveira, Araceli Teixeira, and Alex Sandro Lins. The three of us are going to be the coordination on the in the event, and we have the collaboration of other partners. And I brought a picture from my experiences. So I'm only going to describe the first one. We have Thais Bigatti, that is our host. And we are in a IBC institution. I'm sitting face to face to Lara Gontijo, and we are using tactile communication. And Thais is keeping record of our conversation. So she's one of Lara is one of the examples. We have other examples, but I cannot describe them. I'm so sorry if I talk too much. I'm terrible to keep track with time, and so I leave my email. I'm sorry if I speak too fast, and the interpreters are here for that.
Perfeito, meu querido, perfeito. Muito obrigado pela sua
Thank you,
fala.
Alex.
Acho que agora já tenha corrigido o erro do meu microfone do início.
I think now my mic has been fixed. Alex, thank you for your talk, and I invite you to stay with us, to remain here. So we have other the other speakers. I invite Elaine. She's the professor of the Methodist University of São Paulo.
Professora Elaine, muito bem-vinda. O tempo
Welcome,
é
Elaine.
seu, fique à vontade.
The stage is yours. Thank you. Can you hear me well?
Perfeito. Então, nessa primeira tela
Great.
inicial, eu trago o tema da nossa mesa, formação de guias e intérpretes no Brasil.
So the topic in my first slide is guide interpreters training in Brazil, perspectives and challenges. And you have my email, elaine.vilela@methodist.com.
Pressuposto sem falar da minha tese de doutorado, né?
So I have to start this lecture talking about my thesis, my PhD thesis, based on the narrative method. And I was thinking about the training. So I used the research training. So it's very important to tell the context that when I started my research, I talked to Shirley, and she checked my syllabus for the training, for the course that I based my thesis on. And I remember that I shared this training with many people. And 37 guide interpreters, they accepted to be part of the training, but only 26 attended. And from the 26 that actually attended, something funny happened, because my intention was to offer a course, a training for guide interpreters who were active, who are working with in the field, and who wanted to learn more from social haptics communication. So this was my main focus in the beginning. But the people who came to study with me, they didn't have the basic knowledge from guide interpretation or interpretation, but they were friends, family, wives, husbands of deaf and blind people. So they were not educated, but they were guide interpreters in their daily life with their partners and their family members. So Professor Adriana said it was very interesting, because I had to, when I was writing my thesis, I had a block during the time that I had to report my research. So I had to look inside myself and understand, how did I become a deaf and blind guide interpreter. So I realized that I was a guide interpreter because I had deaf and blind people to work with. I was an interpreter because there were languages who needed, and I was a wife and a mother, because I had the people there to attribute this name to me. So I started to wonder how meeting people, this encounter, how important it was, and I started to understand how the encounter, the meeting with deaf and blind people, and give your body to the other, to bring light and to bring sound. So for me, it's an honor to be part of this process, and it made me the person I am, the professional I am, and the educator that I am. So during this guide interpreters training, I couldn't do what was my mainly idea in the beginning. Social haptics communication would be complementary. But those people who were not professionals, I needed to help them to understand from the basis what were born deaf and blind, acquired deaf and blind. So we talked about the attributes, like the aspects of the work of guide interpreters, and we had 26 students and 4 deaf and blind people that were partners with us during the course. They would validate the process and support our process, and their narratives, the narratives from the family, from the professionals, and from the deaf and blind people, those three profiles, narratives that constitute my thesis. So I'd like to share this narrative with you. One of the people said, "Teacher, we are not guide interpreters. We're always someone from the family, your mother. It matter they are a professional." One of the participants said that. Another one said, "Well, when I talk to someone deaf, I get nervous, and then I tell them, 'Hey, speak slowly. I get nervous.' So I'm not the professional who are with them every day. But only the certificate is not enough. It's a mix of certificate and experience. It's a dignifying job and it's a noble job. So we need to work hard to be so we can be the voice of the other. So Sarah, this participant, she had many courses, many certifications, but she didn't have the ability. She didn't develop the ability with deaf and blind people in an empirical learning environment. So in this image, I have a print from the course that I offered, from the training I offered. We have 10 people and we have a QR code next to their pictures. So if you point your cell phone cam, you can watch our class and our recording at that moment. We have one of our participants that we had a very productive discussion. For example, we have parents that are always with our guide with the deaf and blind people, but they don't have education, and sometimes we have education but we don't have the time for that. So Hilda said, so the person that is always with the deaf and blind person, are they guide interpreters or not? So that was the question that we were discussing in this part of the course. And there was an elderly lady, and she had two daughters, two deaf and blind daughters. So Hilda and Mary, these are fictional names. So she said, but Dona Mary is guide interpreter. So why did I study? Why did I take a specialty course? If you only live with the deaf and blind people, it gives you the power to be a guide interpreter. So why don't I understand that? Why do I have to take a course? Why do I have to have a post graduation? But only living with the so I feel like I'm being the lawyer of the devil. So I have to make the hard questions. What does qualify me to be a guide interpreter? So we were discussing those questions. So we can say that we have two types of guide interpreters, and I believe that Professor Shirley is going to talk about that too. But guide interpreters are the professionals that work with deaf and blind, acquire deaf and blind. It's not the professional that works at school with the kids, for example. So I separate in two categories. The first one is ad hoc, and the second one is the professional one. So what I discuss in my thesis is that the ad hoc guide interpreter is the one who does the work of a professional, the one that supports. So ad hoc is in Latin, that says to an objective, to for example, it could be a document, for example, ad hoc. So someone is named to fulfill some goal or an aim. So a guide interpreter ad hoc is one that's going to fulfill the need right now. For example, mother goes to a hospital with their kid that is the deaf and blind kid. So she's going to be guide interpreter, a doc, guide interpreter, because they are a friend, for example, if they have no formal training, formal education, is going to be the one that does what's needed at the time that's needed. And the professional guide interpreter is the one that has a technical education, a technical training. And then we have Pedro too, the one that's talking right after me. So, as Alex explained at the beginning, the table that we developed, and I also show you that the language and literature course in Espírito Santo, the 8 courses in the federal universities. So, in Vitória, Espírito Santo State is the only university that we have a course for the need of guide interpretation in the 7th semester. So they have 30 hours of theoretical and 30 hours of practical studies. So it's 60 hours of course in an undergraduate course at the university. And I think it's not much time. It's something already because compared to other universities, we have nothing, but it's a good example. It's a good path that other people can advance. And so when we talk about a future perspective for training, as we defend, as we fight for this category as a professional, I'd like to say that when I met Rita personally at Zoom, as we are today, but I remember that Rita offered us a workshop here in Brazil to talk about social haptics communication. And I remember that at that moment, we asked Rita, how is the training of deaf and blind guides for deaf and blind? And in 2021, she said that in Finland it takes 4 years for them to conclude their studies. And I remember that Stina said something similar in her speech time. And they are guide interpreters professionals. And then after their years of education, they choose to specialize in deaf communication or deaf and blind communication. And I loved the initiative that they had to have this training and this education because it works. So I'd like we to have the same here in Brazil.
So I'm not saying that it's not important to have the specialization, but we're thinking about how these guide interpreters have enough information to be able to work properly. Some people start with Letras Libras course, then they go to a specialization for deaf blind people. But I think that the ideal world would be with this information conjoined. That's a discussion that we bring. So I have to discuss a little bit about social haptic communication and information. Me as a sign language interpreter, I realized that when we were uh, changing to another job, another occupation, I understood that the social haptic communication is very important and it's a huge difference in the deafblind people to the deafblind person that we are working with. It's not all deafblind that use it, but so it's very important to bring this perspective. But I have the pleasure to do the first course about deafblind. That was the tactile communication and haptic communication for deafblind people. Today we have in our research group the professional that helped us. He is now with us. it's Rejane Pereira. I'm very proud that she's with us, helping us in this development. So that's the first course that made me see all things that was necessary to add in the formation of someone interpreter or guide interpreter. We also studied in this perspective, in this path that I learned about social haptic communication, the one that is brought from Norway, like a complement conjoined with the communication that the deafblind already uses. So it's in that perspective that the haptic communication, as it's called in Norway, the haptic communication was implemented here in Brazil, and there was a formation course, and it was dispersed in several states. The discussion I bring to my thesis, and there are two images. One is the book Practice of Tactile Interpretation and Social Haptic Communication for People and Haptic Communication for Deafblind People. And in the right is the the cover of my thesis. This book is green. There is a green stripe in the top of it, and an image in the bottom because there is a sense of movement. There are some circular movements, and the cover of my thesis is a little bland. It's like a common with only text with no images. I will ask later on if the organization of the event can disponibilize can put the link for my thesis. It's free. It's in the internet. And in my thesis, I talk about the social haptic communication and the linguistic elements. That's the intention with my advisor to explore more all these linguistic characteristics in the communication. And I intend, and we as a research group, we that organize this event, we want to explore more the subject so we can expand our discussions and reach more people. The references we have today here in Brazil are this book. One of the authors here with us too, which is Katia. We have this reference, and also my PhD thesis and my master's dissertation too, that were built thinking about the spaces of social haptic communication. Then I talk a little bit about the Gepicsh and Gepicsh, the research group. And this slide, I brought a print screen of one of our meetings. There is Rita and Russ. They're here. There's a photo of them in the slide. There is Katia Lorenzo and Carlos Alberto, authors of those books. They also are a part. So there are two people that help us in this process of understanding, research, and exploring, recognizing all the things we're developing as linguistic aspects of social haptic communication. And here the expectations of formation and utilization of social haptic communication. There's an image of a deafblind person sitting in front of a guide interpreter that is doing tactile libras, and other guide interpreter on the back making the haptic sign along with the tactile libras that is happening in the hand. That's the image. That's the deafblind person is Gabriel. He's wearing a polo shirt, a green polo shirt. In the back, it's me with a long and straight hair from the past. And in the front of it, it's another interpreter. That's his sign. He's Marcos Henrique. Me and Marcos, we wear glasses and are wearing black polo shirts, making the mediation and interpretation. currently when
algum surdo cego, ele
when
entra numa
a deaf
faculdade
blind
ou ele entra num
person
curso, ou ele está na escola,
join a
o que
college or
existe,
school,
o que é disponibilizado de uma certa
what
forma é
we make
isso não
available
acontece.
is a professional
Nós
guide interpreter,
batalharemos para que seja
and we are
disponibilizado
fighting
mais
so
guia intérprete, para que
that
aqui
we
seja
can
realizado
offer
o que
another
sempre
guide
gostávamos de
interpreter
fazer.
so we
E é um
can
sonho
make the
nosso
social haptic
poder
communication.
ser
It's a
assim.
dream that
Então,
we
eu só
understand that it's
quero
possible.
agradecer
So I
a
want to thank
presença de
you,
vocês aqui e me coloco à
the presence
disposição.
of
Esse é o
all
meu
of you
e-mail,
here. That's my email, elaine.vilela1 at metodista.br.
Né? Então, a minha mídia
There's
autoral,
our
a Assistive,
Instagram too, my personal, using hands, my company, and also the Gepicsh,
Então, gostaria de agradecer
our research
a
group.
oportunidade de
So I want to
compartilhar
thank you the
com vocês
opportunity of sharing a
momentos
little bit of
incríveis de 4
our
horas em 20
research.
minutos.
4 years in 20 minutes wasn't easy,
Gratidão pela
but
oportunidade.
thank you for the opportunity and for this time here.
Agradecemos,
Thank
professora
you.
Elaine, pela sua
Warley
brilhante
says, well, we
exposição,
thank you, Professor
sua
Elaine, for your
apresentação. E
brilliant
agora vamos dar
presentation.
continuidade a essa
And now
discussão
let's keep
com o
on going
associado, né,
with Professor
professor
Pedro,
adjunto da
Pedro
Universidade
Witz.
Federal
He's
de
a
Espírito
professor
Santo. Professor Pedro,
of the Federal
muito
University of
obrigado pela
Espírito
sua presença.
Santo. Pedro, welcome. Thank you, Warley. Are you hearing me properly? Yes?
Sim, ouvimos alto e claro.
Okay, yes, loud and clear. Okay, I'm just trying to,
Assim, professor.
yeah, it's showing. Okay, thank you. So I want to thank you for thanks the opportunity to be here in this table. I also want to congratulate the organization group. I think that spoke before me, they say a little bit of what I prepared in a good way. They introduce the thing I'm trying to say here, and I will begin saying that my speech about guide interpretation and the superior formation of translators and interpreters. My mail is there is pedro.vitz, WYTCHS at ufes.br. And also, there's also the FAPES, the foundation that is providing money for the research here in Espírito Santo. Professional involvement with deaf-blind kids and adults. And as time passes, and now I'm a professor of the Letras Libras course. As Elaine said, is a course that is a specific case in Brazil because it's the only course that thinks about the deaf, blind, and the guide interpretation. I got this challenge of being responsible with this course, this discipline, which is about the aspects of the guide interpreter. But I have to tell about four people that are very special, which are four people that I'm orienting, I'm advising. The first one is Maria Sirlene Piva. She is not with us in the course anymore, but she was the first person to motivate me to look at this theme when she interested in make his final dissertation here in the Letras Libras of UFES. It's a white female with brown hair, not very long hair, about the neck length, and she's smiling in her photo. The other three, the first one is Jessica Augusto, is a black woman smiling. She has black hair. The third one is Verusca Monteiro, a white woman with red brown hair, smiling. And the last one is Lourdes Ferri, is actual my actual I'm advising her right now. She has gray hair, not very long, about the shoulder. Those four women start to get interested in this theme, the way people communicate, and the definition of ag interpretation, the experiences of experientiation in the tactile way, and that's the themes they are involved, and they invite me to think about that within the course. So I couldn't begin speaking without mentioning those four people. Well, I want to keep talking with a quote of an author named Karen Petronio. She publishes in a dossier from the Federal University of Santa Catarina that was published in 2010. E Karen Petronio, she says one thing that makes like a mark in me. She says that that's a translation I did myself, so I'm not sure if it's okay. I will read the part in Portuguese for you guys here, and the interpreter can read the English. If these interpreters had a better understanding of deaf-blind interpreting and realized that many of the skills they already are using could transfer to deaf-blind interpreting, I believe they would feel more comfortable, would be interested in learning more, and could become competent in improving those services. This would serve to create a larger pool of qualified interpreters available to provide services for deaf-blind individuals. This article from Karen is interesting because she arguments that the competence, the abilities, the knowledge, the attitudes of sign language interpreters can be an advantage, can be like an initial platform so we can develop competence in guide interpretation alongside those peoples. We know that is different characteristics, that is part specific, and that the guide interpretation is not only a common interpretation or translating one sign language to other. We know that it's much more than that. And one definition that I really like is from Beatriz Canuto et al. That wrote this book that Elaine showed us, the book Practice of Tactical Interpretation and Haptic Communications for People, for Deafblind People, that's published in 2020. They show a very interesting definition. They say it's a directed activity for people, for deafblind people, that can match mainly three elements in an integrated way. The first one is the interpretation of interactions with other people. The second is the description of environments, objects, people. And the third is guiding or the activity of conducting, like moving between environments and everything like that. So we realize that the guide interpretation have a huge possibility that is not only the interpretation of language. Alex also said that recently we had an update that the law that regulates the profession of sign language interpreter. It's a law that was published this year, and this change it says that now it's regulated the profession of translator, interpreter, and guide interpreter. It still is, we still have a strong alteration that makes us think about the professional formation of the guide interpreter, which is the restriction or limiting the exercise of this profession. And this profession happens in three axes, like the translator, interpreter, and guide interpreter. and someone that has the diploma in a technical professional education in translation and interpretation in Libras, also in a course of translation and interpretation in Libras Portuguese or Letras, which is literacy or philology, and also Letras Libras or other knowledge areas if they have diploma in extension courses or specialization with minimum time of 360 hours, and also has been approved in a proficiency exam in translation and interpretation in Libras Portuguese. So this scenario is not only what we see in the real world. One thing is the world regulated by the laws, but there's also the reality. And thinking about this profession that is being exercised in a long way, we can think that the guide interpreter and all the guide interpreters are professionals that work like that for several years, and still today they don't have an specific formation, formal formation, but they learn empirically with the contact of deaf-blind people. Well, now I talk a little bit about my experience with the Letras Libras course here in UFES. Some characteristics of this course. It's a bachelor course, is the only specific course for that. All the professors that work here, they are working in the department of languages. The other courses is all teaching courses. Libras will happen mainly in this kind of course, but also in the offering of this discipline that is common to all the teaching courses to develop knowledges and abilities in sign language for students, for teaching students. The course was authorized in 2013. In the next year, the course will have 10 years here in UFES. It's offered presentially in the campus Goiabeiras, which is in the capital city of the Espírito Santo state, named Vitória. Some details Elenia already said, but the course offers some time that we can make in at least 8 semesters.
Esse curso, então, ele tem
So
uma
they can
particularidade.
finish their training in 4 years. This training, this education, they have a mandatory course called translation and interpretation aspects for the guide interpreter. So we have 60 hours of training, 3 theoretical and 30 theoretical and 30 practical in the 7th semester. And the topic of is discussing the work of guide interpreters and the implications in translation and interpretation abilities with the deaf and blind contexts of communication. So when we research how this course started, we find 2 professors. Professor Jeffa Santana is a JB sign next to the mouth, and Professor Luciene Vieira Machado, who has the sign of a P in the hand, similar to the sign of truth in Portuguese. The 2 professors are part of the the organization who created this course before 2013. They were the pioneers who created the pedagogical project that thinks about this curriculum and creates the course, the discipline of guide interpretation. So the theoretical publications, the production in Brazil is very incipient, is very little. In practice, like people were working as guide interpreter, but the education, the academic field is still very very initial. So we are working in this curriculum to develop more, and we are thinking about a new topic because the name, as you see here, translation and interpretation aspects of guide interpreters. This name, the interpreters, the students call them the deaf and blind, course, the deaf and blind education. So in every semester, I always tell them it's not a deaf and blind course. You are learning to be translators and interpreters. So the deaf and blind topic and the people experience, of course, is part of our content, but it's not a course about deaf and blind people. So sometimes we have to think about the name of the course, and students, they have a lot of expectation about this course because in the 7th semester they realize they're going to study about this topic, so they get very anxious to study that. It was the first opportunity to offer this discipline. I wasn't the professor here, so Professor Leni Batista was the one who offered the course, and she had a partnership with Brazil Group and Ahimsa, and they created a important event about guide interpretation and deaf and blindness here at the Federal University of Espírito Santo. So this was very important for people to practice in this event in 2017, and we had no idea that we were going to have remote interpretation and remote activity as we have now after the pandemic period. So back then was very important to as a milestone for our course and for our university. And I have been teaching this course, this discipline, and I always teach it, or I'm always the partner in this discipline. So I started teaching the course in 2018. I asked my partners, my friends, I asked Fernanda, I asked Shirley, and I had the opportunity to meet them, and I started discussing, and I realized how important it was to give this education, this training process for translators and interpreters that needed the competencies, the abilities of guide interpretation. So this course has some topics that I can list for you now. Social, historical, and linguistic aspects of deaf and blindness, professional and ethical elements from the guide interpretation, Brazilian Sign Language tactile modality, and the implications of interpretation, which is one of the topics that students want to study. They're very interested. Alternative communication systems and haptic communication, and mobility and orientation of deaf and blind people. Here I have some pictures that I've taken along the years. In this course, the first one you can see a group of people, female, male people. They're sitting in a chair as they were in a classroom. The same display it was taken in May 2023, this year, and the students who were taking this course, they were part of a Braille workshop in the NEAP, which is the Center of Support Pedagogical Inclusion at school. We know that Braille is not very common among deaf people, but thinking that the language and literature course called Letras Libras, we have to offer holistic education that they can learn the different ways of communication that the student can be able to use and to acquire when they encounter people with deaf and blindness. So they, along the semester, they keep studying Braille and doing exercises and activities. And the next picture, we have the students walking in on the walls on the halls of the university, and the students are working as pairs. So each one of the pair has a function. One of them is blindfolded. I don't know if you can see the picture, but I remember that some of them were using a stick, a can, uh, and the other person was representing the guide interpreter. So this is a orientation and mobility activity. Some of them were using a walking stick, and they are practicing description and mobility. And the third picture I present to you is one of the moments that they have an exercise of tactile libras and tactile description in a zoo with animals in the library. These are pictures from the stuffed animals, and this picture is from our last semester, the last time the course was offered in the undergraduation course. And so we try to teach some abilities in the course, and we also have two different pictures that we have interpretation, guide interpretation tactile with social haptics communication. For example, we have two trios of students. One of them is in the center representing the deaf and blind person, and the other two are, which are the main focus, they are practicing the experience of being a professional translator, a professional interpreter, using the tactile interpretation, the social haptics, the social haptic communication, the messages. And something that's very important during this course, and that the students always ask for when we evaluate the students by the end of the course, one of the things they always say is that they are interested and they want to be in touch with deaf and blind people in real life along the course. And this is very complex because we have to be ethical. We cannot go out on the street grabbing people, deaf and blind people, to be volunteers, to be our guinea pigs in the courses. So we we invite them to be part of that, and in situations to lecture, to be speakers in our course, but we don't have people definitely to be with us during the whole course. But we want to be careful during the simulation, during these exercises, that we understand that we are having an experience how it is to be a deaf and blind person. That's not the goal. That's not our interest. Those activities are not focused on that. Is the experience of feeling how to be an interpreter during the course. It's not how to we cannot feel how is to be like a deaf and blind person. It's not how I receive the communication, but how you think and of it, strategies, how you express yourself as a guide interpreter. How do I adapt myself as a professional, and resources and the strategies that I use adapted to the deaf and blind person. So this is an aspect that is very important to all of us, and we are not interested in to simulate the living experience of a deaf and blind person. Any attempt of that wouldn't be ethical. And coming to an end of my speech, I'd like to share this pedagogical interpreters and interpreters. So it's something for us to think about, since we have the law, and this profession is recognized by law. So in the process of hiring these professionals, so us as academic and deaf and blind community, how do we demand from the government? How do we tell the state and the government what do we want? So I think that as professionals, we have to discuss about the contents that we want in our courses, so we can give quality training, not one course of 60 hours, as Eleni said, that it's interesting, it's good to have it, but it's too little. So those responsible for graduating interpreters and translators, how they can incorporate the knowledges of guide interpretation, social haptics communication, and all the ways that deaf and blind people use to communicate. We also can demand professionals with experience and with knowledge about guide interpretation. So Ahinsa Brazil Group, they have a very important work developed along the years, and so we have to consider those specialists and those who have been working all those years. And something else that I like to propose is that we incentivize those institutions that give at the universities, that they have teaching and learning, extension and research projects related to guide interpretation, the training of guide interpreters and deaf and blind people. So I'd like to congratulate Gepicsh's group. It's a milestone in the Brazilian scenario for producing those discussions, and I understand as a collective that we should fight for investments, so the society and ONGs NGOs and the other institutions, how they can have a stronger framework, a stronger structure, because they are traditionally the ones who have developed the training for and the education for guide interpreters. So if we have now a law that talks about guide interpretation, so it's an obligation from the government to provide the resources. So we have it like us in free and public training and education for those professionals. So those are my reflections. Those are my thoughts, and I leave this article. Maria Sirlene Piva. Her work was published as Belas Infiéis in 2023, and they talk about guard interpretation for deaf and blind people, the analysis from the course, and most of the things I said you can find there in the article too. This is my email again, pedro.witz@ufis.br, and in my group, Salis, at salis.ufis and salis.ufis.br, that you can see our group. Is not a group dedicated to deaf and blindness, but is a group dedicated to sign languages, and has dedicated as well to the guide interpretation topic. Thank you very much. I'm available for any question. Thank you.
So we want to thank Professor Pedro for his presentation. Now, for our next guest is Professor Shirley Rodrigues Maia, who will tell about the formation of a guide interpreter from her perspective. Professor Shirley, welcome. Shirley says, thank you, Arley, for your presentation. I'm very happy to have all this team with me, young people and older people. I think it's very important in the research, in our works, because when we think historically about everything regarding deaf blindness, but especially the guide interpretation, in Brazil, it really started after one very important work made by Professor Yolanda Rodrigues, is a deafblind person from Colombia. She was a bilingual secretary. She became deafblind when she was she was born. She had an anaphylactic shock, and after that, he became a deafblind person. After that, he started to think what's important for deafblind people, and she dared to, and I think that the most significant thing is she went to an event that happened because of the International Deafblind organization in Switzerland. No, in Sweden, I'm sorry. And she started to realize that in Latin America, deaf-blind people were almost invisible, and she wanted to promote the formation and empowerment for deaf-blind people and guarantee that they can participate more. So she created a program that the name was Postcall, and was supported by the former president, the WFDB, the World Federation of Deafblind, was Steve Olson from Sweden too. Unfortunately, he passed away some time ago, but he believed a lot in the potential of Mistress Yolanda, so they can make research on Colombia, Venezuela, Peru, and to really make deafblind people. But they realized that in order to get to the deafblind people, they had a lot of other difficulty, which is who is going to support deafblind people in the formation they wanted to make, because they understood that it was important to have an association, it was important to have pairs for the discussions, and they also realized that didn't have people that was graduated or knew that there is one function called guide interpretation. Mostly the ones who accompanied that was professors or teachers, uh, teacher or people from the family, like wife, husband, son, uh, daughters. Then they had the opportunity to organize and host here in Brazil this meeting. So the first course for formation of guide interpreters in Latin America was for Colombia. The second country was Brazil, and then it started expanding. So today, after this time, which is 1997, only Brazil and Colombia kept making these courses. It had the name of Course of Empiricist Deaf Blind Guide Interpreters. So we had to mark that it was an empiric formation. All this formation was based initially in things coming from Sweden. Sweden was the country that brought to Brazil and to Colombia and other countries from the Latin America this kind of formation based on the time in that time. And of course, she wanted to propose as the expansion of people having this empowerment, but they wanted people to have this empowerment, but first need to have the formation. When it happened in Brazil, was still we didn't have this public policies for deaf people or interpreters. So the course initially was for people who was connected to the institution they worked in Brazil with deafblind, being professors or teachers, or people from some churches that already had a job with sign language. And we have some people from different parts of Brazil in this formation. We made a selection. That was the initial proposal of the guide interpreting course, to choose two people so they can be the multipliers of this information. So we chose one teacher and one interpreter. And then we saw that it was important because there was a second phase in Colombia, along with Penescol, that also have a very similar role as FENACE here in Brazil. And they helped us to make the course and had the compromise of returning and making more of those. So Professor Dalva Rosa Watanabe was a professor that worked for several years here in Ahimsa. Today he only works in the MEBIS, the deaf school, but also acts in Ahimsa doing some works about deaf blindness and the formation of guide interpreters. And we had an initial discussion alongside this initial empowerment with adults deafblind. How are we going to do to make this training information? And we started this first problems. I was saying the first problems because today we say about the research formations that I think it's something important, because if you for you to develop a role, I think that Firstly, there is the commitment of what this is going to, where this is going to take you, know what is going, what you're doing, and what are the consequences of you having or not a good act in what you choose. And actually, he had a big problem because the two people that was there, this teacher and the interpreter decided that wasn't going, won't go because she thought she didn't have the emotional strength to do that. So that's something that we can think about when we say about the formation of guide interpreter and mediators, because you really have to think that you're doing something in a perspective that it's not yours, but it's from the other, from thinking about the need and the accessibility. This this person really brought a very difficult time for the beginning of the course. That's when we reorganized with Professor Dalva a whole formation and a whole new organization. And the first course, we had a lot of support from the Institute APAI in São Paulo. We also made a formation where we chose to have teachers first, then interpreters, other interpreters that can really be the interpreter formation. We didn't have at the time. The courses that had that time was courses that happened alongside the formation from the education ministry here in Brazil, that there were exams. At that time, we didn't have the Letras Libras course yet. And then we had, because of that, we were able to bring also moms to improve the quality of life of deafblind people in their families so they can have access and understand this process. Initially, this course that was ministered, the course of guide interpreters, empiricists. And after that, we made a course for volunteers so we can really make it accessible for the deafblind people and make accessible their participation in events. And the city committee of people with disability never had the opportunity to access the politics debates. So all their needs, uh, the idea there was to think about solutions where deafblind could be the protagonists of their fights. And today we have most of the deaf and blind people fighting and knowing about their rights and participating in these councils with the support of the guide interpreters. So that's something that we realized. And actually, the formation here in Brazil started because of those needs of people the deaf with deaf blindness, and to get out of this isolation, not just staying home, but really participating. I remember that one of the first events that we thought that, oh, it would be very nice, everyone would know about, to know who are the guide interpreters, who are the deaf blind. We went to one event that happened from the old court, which is uh, that happens in 1998 here in Brazil. There is a place where people with disability rights were discussed in the education ministry. We went to São Paulo and we had 11 deafblind people and a lot of guide interpreters there. Most of them were teachers that made these courses of empiricist guide interpreters, and who made these courses in APAI also participated, so we could offer the possibility to be in an official event. And that was very interesting because that's something that we still realize that people aren't ready. We also realize that Even today, despite the formations at work, the deafblind, when they go to some events, some of the lecturers speak so fast that the guide interpreter, if they don't have a support, they can really understand what's being said. So we were able to stop this event several times and say, well, you're given the possibility of people with disability understand what's going on. That time, one of the main topics of discussion were the accessible book. Like, how can you say anything about an accessible book if your speech is not accessible? So we stopped several times the event so people won't speak so fast, and deafblind people can ask, participate, make things slowly. So it was very interesting. And in fact, for the people that is being the lecture, that's doing the lecture, and for the deaf blind person to know their needs. So this formation, we sensed a lot of difficulties, and today we have Venezuela. Venezuela is starting to make courses, had some online courses with us and with Peru too. They had a lot of people that can't participate because they don't have access. I think that's the main challenge that still happen. And that's when we realize of the need to not only happen a course for itself, like just to multiply things, but to actually study them, study what had to be done, what had to be said, and it still need thinking about the needs of this formation. So we were studying more with other people, and we did some modifications of the course initially empiric. That was, and we started to discuss that alongside Colombia, which was the first country. And we started to discuss and understand, and we thought it was very interesting to see the new proposals of the formation about the guide interpreter. Then we had some discussions with the universities to stop and think like, where is the formation, the course for interpreters? Is in graduation or is it separate courses? What we realize is that we have a lot of boxes, closed boxes in the university. And sometimes it's hard to leave our comfort zone and we're like, oh, I won't research because I don't know about that. But if you put yourself like to learn together, it's still very hard for us to have people like we see Elaine's advisor, Adriana, like to have this opening to give that to Elaine and for us as a group, because in fact we still have these questions that for most there are a lot of people that want to make thesis and the PhD and they don't know anything about subject and they don't want to know about that. So there are some difficulties that we face, and it's a part of the processing of what is a good course or where does this course get in, where do we do that. And during the formation of the guide interpreter, we know that the guide interpreter graduates, then there is a kid in school that needs a guide interpreter, but it's not deaf blind that acquired that during the life. It's a congenital. So it's another barrier. How are we going to do that? The person that graduates to work in the role as interpreter and to also make the service of guide, of support to this job. How are we going to do that with this deaf-blind kids that most of the time don't even have communication? So that's hard. Those are barriers that we still see, that people have difficulties to understand the information. I think that it's things that bring us what is important to understand and study. Since Grupo Brasil made a lot of international events, we are trying to bring a lot of professionals that can compose this different studies, this work. And that's why Russ and Rita are now with us since 2015. And also Professor Steve Collins from Galileo University was with us. So we can think what to do and how to do about the guide interpreter formation. What I think about this formation and this organization today, mainly I think is to think that if being in the Letras Libras course and the Federal University of, for instance, in the Federal University of Alagoas, there's also one discipline because one of the people that coordinates is one of the people that made the course for congenital deaf blindness, and then she had basic formation on guide interpretation. And also from the Federal University of Espírito Santo, we went to Federal University of Alagoas and we informed the professionals an introduction of the guide interpretation course. I think that's very important. I congratulate Pedro, which keep working. Elaine too, that is also working in this formation. Marcia, always there too. But that's still something that we see that is necessary. Like there are myths, Alex, that makes the events of guide interpreters and interpreters that are so important. And also the importance that we see for the person to understand that there is different kinds, different systems of communication. And you can make like a general, for instance, tactile libras for deafblind. We have other questions that involve the deafblindness. Alex said too about the formation, the Viver Sem Limites plan that was launched yesterday here in Brazil. We had a meeting in Brasilia along with the National Secretary of People with Disabilities, and we comment about the need, since we are talking about in Brazil, we are talking about the Viver Sem Limites plan. That was very important to have the formation of guide interpreters nationally. And the answer we had was, well, but they said that the number of deafblind is not significant. So it's very sad. It's very disappointing when we heard that. We talk today about people with disability and we have to have numbers. That's what they said. If you have one or two, it's a lot of work, I think. But that time when we are talking and thinking about the policies, we can't have this dimension because they don't see a lot of deafblind people, so they don't think it's important to make directives for them or have policies for them. Today, because of this event, we are happy to see that there are a lot of people because we have more opportunities to discuss these questions. And we are also seeing the opportunity to study even more to understand who are the guide who's the guide interpreter? What's the profile of guide interpreter we need? Or to see that in deafblind we need guide interpreters just to do personal things. And that's a different relation that when I am in a university or an event or in a school. So I think that that's a discussion we have to listen to what deafblind people have to say, to see the need that work and to think about the sense that it's very important to them because actually we want to make the world more possible so they can access, they can do things. And we have also to think that during the pandemic it was terrible because they needed the touch, the contact, and the that was terrible for them because they wasn't able to do that. They wasn't able to have contact when you need the contact. So I think that's it about the formation. We can think about these questions and sometimes about the guide interpreters formation. We can think about the emotional thing of the deaf-blind people, deaf-blind person and the people working there. So we don't have a confusion of roles. They can understand the need of an ethical job of the people participating actually and doing in a way that the deaf-blind person can feel happy because it's participating and they're having an they can realize that some people, as we said, some people think that guide the deafblind people to for a ride or to a park, he's already a guide interpreter. Oh, we know a little bit about Libra, so I'm a guide interpreter. Or oh, I'm already done because I've been with a deafblind person before. I don't know. I believe that those are questions that we still have to discuss. And I'm happy with our group, our research group, because we've been studying a lot to and knowing that there is a possibility for deafblind people to be with us and understand what's the best way, what's the best kind of interpretation, what means to touch, to have contact with someone, and how does that see that the sometimes deaf blind people don't have a tactile development and they have to like have a literacy process in the tactile way. That's a lot of discussions we still don't have here, but we can have in the future. In the future, I'm very happy to know a lot of people here today, a lot of new people here today, and I think we still have a lot to research to learn. Me and Marcia are from the old days, but we can still study, we can still discuss those questions. I think that's the message I wanted to leave with you when we think about the guide interpreter formation. Thank you, Shirley. Thank you for your speech. We are listening. We're all clapping here. And I wanted to invite our guests to be here with us. Because of the time, I think we won't be able to answer all the questions we got in the chat, but I wanted to put in discussion a single question that came from my doubts as a researcher, and I wanted that each one of you very quickly could contribute for us to understand what are the challenges and how can we as institutions, each one of us are inserted and with which our research, our actions, our projects, how can we beat these challenges that were perfectly explained for you and those in this table for an initial formation and a continuous formation for guide interpreters. I think many of you who are watching us in your own cities have difficulty to find quality information or lacks the offer of those knowledges of the skills in Federal University and Letras Libras. So thinking about your point of view, Elaine, Alex, Pedro, and Shirley, uh, each one with your own knowledge, we can understand how can we propose initiatives, projects, so we can offer uh, information for guide interpreters in Brazil. It could be in the same order as the presentation, Alex, Elaine, Pedro, then Shirley. And after that, we can finish it. I will only ask for you to do that very quickly because of our time. Perfect. Oh, it's hard. I like to say it's hard to answer first because we have a lot of doubts. But thinking professionally, I think there are two questions. The first one is the category as mobilization, because I represent an association. So who are us, and what are we? What do you want as a collective, to know what information we have to have? But I think it's important for us that we work in the area and we want to work in the guide interpretation. What information do we need? What we feel we need. I remember that the first course I did was with Grupo Brasil. Professor Shirley was my first teacher, and many things I learned there. But other questions was to understand the place I was talking. Like I'm a person that worked in Letras Libres, and I understood the complexity information in superior level, and I understand that those knowledges that I didn't have in my starting formation, those are knowledge that I had to explore that later. I think we have to occupy those places to emanate this formative process so that not only translators and interpreters discuss about the guide interpreting. We have a lot of things we do in common, but we have a lot of things that are not the same. I think we were able to advance a lot in this sense, but I think we need to advance even more so guide interpretation and translation and interpretation are on the same level. So please associate yourselves. If you don't have any association, please get in contact with Fabrapils to mobilize yourself. The second thing is to enjoy this time, that because now we are having more opportunities to have dialogues with the policies. When I brought about the Viver Sem Limites, I feel a lot comfortable to critique because we are in a government that we are able to critique and to have dialogues. So we use this dialogical space to say that we didn't have space, but today we have room for negotiation. Right now, I looked at the presentation yesterday, I planned today, but next week I will schedule a meeting to talk with the education ministry, the the all those ministries to say, well, how is this going to impact our category? How what's being thought for this group, and then uh, understand that public policies happens because of the social control, and nor and us as political people, we sometimes let it slide and don't give the proper attention. There was a question in the chat was like, oh, how people let that happen? It's a negotiation. Sometimes we have to let this door open so later on we can. Formation in social expectations. Okay, if gets in the special education, inclusive education, we expected it to be in another place, but okay, we can put that in special education. It's not a problem. It's a bad thing, but everything has two sides. We have to at least two sides. We have to enjoy. We have to use this known place we are occupying right now so we can uh, get the benefits of that. If we want, we have to discuss the deaf education, okay, but we are going to say that, okay, we also want to say about that blindness, we also want to talk about guide interpreters, and it doesn't matter if someone is going to be bothered by it or not. I think that's one of our role here.
Seguindo a fala do Alex, eu ia até mencionar que
Well,
talvez
Elaine is
parte da
saying,
comunicação
alongside
que
with Alex's
existe
speech, I
anteriormente,
know that
muitos anos atrás, eu lembro que eu
prior to
fiz uma
that, many
pesquisa,
years
pesquisei,
ago,
e eu ouvi muitas pessoas
some
falando sobre
researchers
isso,
analyzed
que
and
o
saw a lot of
país e o
people
Grupo
talking
Brasil,
about
eles tinham um
that
apoio do governo
Ahimsa
para
and
que os
Brazil Group
estudos
had the
ocorressem.
support of the
E
government to do
não
the
foi
courses,
feito esse apoio
and
efetivo.
in some time this
Então,
support
hoje,
was left.
não é acessível para
Today,
muitas
it's
pessoas
not accessible for many people, the
existir profissionais
courses
intérpretes,
to
né?
guide
Porque
interpreters
hoje a Ahimsa
professional,
e o Grupo Brasil não têm o mesmo apoio que eles
because
tinham
today Grupo
antigamente.
Brasil and
Então,
Ahimsa
eu
don't
acredito
have
que
the
se
same
tivesse
support
esse
they had
apoio do
before.
governo, um
So I
apoio
believe that if we
referente
had the support for
a
from the
investimento,
government,
né, nessa classe, a gente
investments
teria
in this class,
inclusive
I think that will be
popularizaria mais
amazing
pessoas
because it
conseguiriam
will
fazer curso. Então, muitas
more
pessoas
people would be
me
able to
procuram,
do
falam
this
assim, olha, eu
course. A
busquei
lot of people
informação de
look for
fazer o
me and say,
curso,
"Wow,
porque
I'm
estamos em São
sorry, I want to
Paulo, tem que
learn, but
pagar o
it's only in
curso, tem que
São
pagar
Paulo. We have to
o
pay the course.
deslocamento,
We
tem que
have to
pagar
pay for our
acomodação e
tickets. We
hospedagem
have
para
to
ficar
pay
um
for a
ano lá
hotel. We
interpretando.
have to."
Né? Então, eu
It's
acho
something
que esse
very
auxílio,
complex. I think that support,
financeiro, eu acho que
financial
auxiliaria muito
support, is
esse processo. E
very
a questão
important for
também
this process,
da educação à
and
distância,
also
porque o EAD ela diminui essas
the
distâncias e ela
distance
vai
education
proporcionar
too.
popularizar nesse sentido de
It happens
alcançar esse
to
lugar mais distante,
reach people
que é o que
that
o Grupo Brasil já está
are more
fazendo. Ele
distant,
também
and that's what the
né,
Grupo Brasil has been
tem
doing.
proporcionado cursos à distância,
They
cursos desse
do a lot of
movimento, né? A pessoa
courses
pode escolher se
that
vai
are
fazer
made
presencial ou se vai fazer online.
virtually. They can
Então,
choose
isso
if they
é super
go
positivo,
presentially or
né?
online, and
Mas eu
that's
acredito que a gente
something very
precisava,
positive
né,
for the formation.
também que fizesse
But
essa
we needed more
informação, né?
places
A
that do this
multiplicação que o professor
formation
Shirley
to
tem falado
this
tanto,
multiplication.
essa
Professor
questão
Shirley
mais
say it
poderia
should
ser mais
be
efetivo, né? Talvez
more
um
effective.
treinamento para que
Maybe a
pessoas possam
training
formar
so
outros
people
grupos.
can
Eu acho que
make
seria
other
também
groups. I
uma
think
excelente
that
iniciativa
that will be a very
proporcionar
nice
essa questão da
initiative so we can
formação
improve
do
this
profissional de
formation
intérprete.
thing
Passar
about
a
the
palavra para o
guide
Pedro.
interpreter professional. Now, Pedro,
Eu vou insistir na mesma
I
tecla
will
que
insist the same thing as
o
Alex and
Pedro
Elaine,
falou,
and I think
que a mobilização é importante.
the
Eu
mobilization is
acho
important.
que
And
essas
I think
possibilidades
that
de
those
nós
possibilities
estarmos em rede e esse
so
evento
that
é uma
we are
conjunção
acting as
dessas
a
coisas, né?
network, and
Eu
this
acho que
event
são
is
significativas para
the
que nós nos
concrete the
expandamos
concrete of
enquanto
this
sistema.
network,
Eu
the
acho que na
concrete
medida
part of
em
this
que a gente
network.
se transforma
I
em
think that's
movimento,
when
nós
we
podemos
start a
reivindicar
movement.
mais
If we begin a
de uma
movement, we
maneira
can
mais
claim
forte, talvez criar forças
strongly,
para
like
justamente
create strong
combater
claims
questões como a
and
Shirley fala para gente.
avoid
Olha,
things like what
você
Shirley
recebe um
says
retorno dizendo, mas
when
são
she
pessoas
get
com surdo
an
cegueira
answer like, "Oh, but
poucas,
it's
né?
so
Então a gente não
so
precisa ter
little
tantos
people,
investimentos
so
assim.
deaf,
Eu
so
acho que
little
ela
deafblind, so
precisa
we don't have
aparecer e debater este argumento, afinal de contas elas
to
são poucas, então elas são a
invest that."
minoria. E aí
So we have to use that argument. If they are little, they are minority, so
eu acho
they
que
need more
inverter a
attention.
lógica desse
I
argumento,
like
pensando
to
que se
invert the
são
logic of
menos,
this argument. Like,
então por
well,
isso
if
mesmo
the
a gente
is
precisa
little, yeah,
focar nossas
that's
atenções das políticas
exactly the
públicas
reason why we have
nessas
to
pessoas, né? E aí eu acho
look
que
to this group
esse
because it's a
requerimento,
minority.
essa reivindicação
And I
em
think
torno
this
de exigir que o Estado se comprometa com que
I think
entidades
that
como
we
o Grupo
can
Brasil e
have a commitment
Ahimsa
so
se tornem
group
entidades
things like Grupo Brasil and
amparadas pelo
Ahimsa
Estado
to
para
be
que essa
entities
formação se
supported
fortaleça
by the
nesse país,
state so this
para que as
formation can
parcerias
be
não sejam
stronger in the
parcerias da
country
boa
so
vizinhança,
this
que é então
is not
pegam,
like
tipo assim,
my friend that's going
Shirley,
to
todas as
make
pessoas
something like
que estão
Shirley and
fora do Grupo
Adriana
Brasil
and
precisam, às vezes,
Fernanda.
contar com a boa
Sometimes
vontade
they
de
have to
levar,
expect
né, criar um
the
projetinho e
goodwill
levar
of
elas para lá, para um lugar
people
onde,
that is
afinal, isso
going
tem que
to
ser uma
help
política de
them, but I
Estado
think
e essas
has
instituições e
to
essas pessoas
become
que
a
trabalham
state
com uma
policy
tecnologia
that
da
so that these
comunicação
people that work
sejam
in a
respaldadas por
pioneer
essas
way
pessoas,
of guide
sejam
interpretation have
institucionalizadas
the
e,
support
portanto,
so this
amparadas pelo
partnerships can
investimento
be
público, né? Então,
institutionalized
eu
and
acho que isso aí é uma perspectiva
supported
para a gente
by the
começar a
public
formação
investment. So I think
de
that's something
intérpretes em
important so we can
escala
think about the
mais
formation of guide
pessoas
interpreter
num
in
país
a
tão grande.
large country like
Então é
Brazil.
isso, obrigado.
That's it. Thank you.
Complementando todos vocês, né? Mas assim, eu acho que é um sonho, o Arlen. Foi uma visita que eu realizei na Universidade.
Shirley saying, well, that's a dream. when in 2020 I went with Vula to a country, to a university in other countries, and in Norway we are talking with them in Norway, in Australia, in Sweden, and with Rita too. We've been talking a lot about the formation. And one possibility that we saw is when we were with Professor Steve Collins and the team of the Gallaudet University. We got to São Paulo and we were calling some people that graduated as guide interpreters that were always also interpreters, and they were part of a formation where we want to make mentoring so we can graduate mentors to have exactly what Elaine said, to have other places, other spaces. Unfortunately, we have like a seed, we also throw that seed and eventually have to bloom. We know sometimes it get dormant, but one day it will have to bloom. Maybe now it's time so we can take again this idea and see who did this course, who wanted to make this formation and structure a mentoring course. And that's something that United States also do. Other countries too already do these courses of mentoring. And what can we do about that? I think that's something really for the future we can discuss. It's a possibility. Then I see the possibility of use Hélio, Carlinhos, Elaine, and we to introduce the social haptic communication for everyone who works in the formation of the guide interpreters. Not only that, but other questions too that happen. The guide interpreters that go to school, what we think about that. If in the government there's not acquired deaf blind, we can miss the opportunity to have other people to. I think that's something we have to discuss within our group, but maybe it's a little seed that came from 2020. We still can make it happen. I don't know. I think that's it. Mhm. Yeah, Warley says, yeah, for sure. I think we have a lot of ideas and possibilities, but unfortunately, because of the time we have to finish, we still have two other activities. So I want to thank you all for being here, our guests, the translator, guide interpreters, and current president of the Guide Interpreter Association, Alexander Lins, Professor Elaine from the Methodist University of São Paulo, Professor Pedro Vites from the Federal University of Espírito Santo, and Professor Shirley Rodrigues Maia from Ahimsa. Thank you all for the opportunity to be here to mediate this process. In formative context is my greatest passion for research and the search for new knowledge. And I finished this table, and now Thais, our ceremony master, can conduct the rest of the activity. Thank you all, and let us hope we have an excellent event.
Agradecemos. Agradecemos ao
Thank
professor
you.
Mestre.
Thank you, Professor Master Warley, and our guests for the knowledges we shared. Now we have a small intermission, and 6 p.m. we return for our next activity, which is the launch of the book Memories of Inclusion, which is a part of the collection of Narrative Research, Volume 3, made from the organizers and the presenter of the book. We hope everyone will be here with us. After that, we'll have the closing lecture. Stay with us, we still have a lot of knowledge to share.